the controls over here. So yes, so thank you once again for that wonderful welcome. And yes, there are a lot of stories that our ancestors have richly made and given us, and we need to try and decode some of these things to see what exactly do they mean when they said these stories. Now, one thing we should remember, we live today in big, huge cities like Pune, Bengaluru, Mumbai, and other such places where there's so much of light at night. And we, backyard astronomers, we call this light pollution. We can't see the skies at all today. You go out to your backyard, you can hardly see a couple of stars at night. But if you were to go to a deep, dark spot, like in a rural area elsewhere, you might see brilliant displays of the skies. Now, you must imagine in ancient times in India, maybe on a warm summer evening after dinner, there's no television, there is no Instagram or Twitter to keep you active. So the best thing you do is put your cot outside and lie down and watch the celestial display out there. So we had brilliant skies, brilliant shows, and the skies became familiar friends for our ancestors. So they started trying to make sense out of the movements of the heavenly bodies that they see and trying to encode some wisdom. That is the roots of many of our stories. And you can imagine thousands of years, thousands upon thousands of years of observing the sky and wisdom passed down generation to generation have resulted in enormously amazing astronomical wisdom. And that is what I hope to bring out in today's talk. So one of the earliest stories that you can say about Indian astronomy is this very familiar story about Chandra. So now there was King Daksha. Daksha was a person with a lot of daughters, and he had 27 daughters who he married to Chandra. And this story comes in the Bhagavad Purana and the Brahma Vaivarta Purana, the Vishnu Puranas. These are our sources for these stories. And they make us sit and wonder, what is the story all about? Well, it turns out that the earliest model of the skies was one of the Nakshatras and Rasi. What exactly is a nakshatra? So before we say that, we need to try to see what our ancestors might have seen. Every day, they would observe that the moon appears in the eastern horizon at a different time every day, offset by about 48 minutes or so. They'd see that the moon appears a little later every day, and therefore, against a different backdrop of the stars, if it was nighttime especially, a different backdrop of the stars. They also observed that it takes approximately 27 days for the moon to come back to the same backdrop of stars. So therein was born the idea that let's divide the entire ecliptic. Ecliptic is a path in which the sun and the moon appear to traverse in our skies. They divided the ecliptic into 27 segments of 13 and 1/3 degrees each. And they called each of these segments as a nakshatra. So we also identified a principal brightest star in each segment. Sometimes it's not the brightest star, but still they selected as particular star for a certain reason. So they selected some star or group of stars, and they gave it the mnemonic, right? They had to give a mnemonic so they'll remember what that is. And the mnemonic was one of the names of the wives of the moon. So just by remembering the order of the wives, they could also say when the moon will be in which nakshatra and so on. So every day as the moon would traverse to a different nakshatra, they would say it is going to one more of his wife's houses and so on and so forth. So this was the earliest Indian astronomical model. And you can see the names over here, things like Chitra, Vishaka, Jyeshta, and so on. So all these names are distributed over here, 27 of them. Now, Indians also had the concept of a lunar month. And the lunar month was differently observed. In some places, if the full moon appears, for example, in the Chitra Nakshatra, if the full moon is over the Chitra Nakshatra, that means the moon is illuminated by the sun 180 degrees away. The sun would be in the Ashwini Nakshatra. So that month would be called the Chaitra Masa. So somebody says Chaitra Masa, that means the full moon is appearing in that particular nakshatra during this 27-day period. In some parts of India, they also use the new moon as the indicator of the month, and in some parts they use the full moon. But apart from that, it's about the same. And we also had a division of the sky in 30-degree segments, and there are 12 of them. These are familiar Rashi that you see, the Meena Rashi, Mesha Rashi, Vrishva, and so on. So our ancient ancestors had both a lunar as well as a solar calendar, and that is what we learn from here. And this is a listing of all the nakshatra names, and the principal star they're associated with is things like, for example, these listed in two of our ancient books, the Vedanga Jyotisha and the Surya Siddhanta. The names are about the same, although these books are very, very ancient and in time from each other also. So you see Kritika, Rohini, Mrigashira, Dhra, Punarvashu, and so on, all the way to till this Bharani star over here, and my own nakshatra is Revathi. And we see the principal stars associated with also, for example, Kritika is with Eta Tauri, Rohini is Alpha Tauri, Mrigashira is Lambda Orionis, and Revathi is Zeta Piscean, and so on. So these principal stars are known. When the British came to India, they asked the Pandits what each of those nakshatras are and mapped it to the Western constellations. And that is how we know some of these mappings. So our question continues. Okay, Chandra married the 27 daughters of King Daksha. What else does the story represent? Well, like I said, it is related to the 27.3-day sidereal month. A sidereal month means the duration it takes for the moon to return to the same backdrop of the stars or to the same nakshatra. That is 27.3 days. And it also represents the traversal of the moon. In a 24-hour period, the moon traverses 13.3 degrees in the sky. It represents that in addition. So the story goes that Chandra visited a wife each day. However, his father-in-law, Daksha, he had heard that Chandra seems to favor one of his daughters, Rohini, more than the others. And he was furious. How can you treat my daughters unequally? And you're only favoring Revathi or Rohini over the others? And that is not okay. So he curses his son-in-law. He says, for this transgression, you shall die. And what happens? Chandra spooked by this whole thing. So he runs off to Mahadeva and prays, Mahadeva, I don't want to die. And Mahadeva says, all right, I'll grant you a boon. I can't remove the curse. So you're going to die, but after you die, you'll once again grow. So you go through a life of waxing and waning. So this is what we see, that the moon goes through from the new moon, it becomes bigger till the full moon and again reduces down to the new moon. So this part of the story now is encoding a different kind of month, which the ancients also knew. This is called the synodic month. A synodic month is when the moon returns to the same phase. If you're talking from new moon to new moon or full moon to full moon, that is about 29.5 days. In India, this is called the Tithi. If you're used to looking at the Panchanga, you'll see that Tithi is one of the things that you observe after Nakshatra. Nakshatra tells you the Nakshatra of the day, this tells you the Tithi. So what is this story about, love story about Chandra now? Why on earth did our ancients put this particular story? If moon visits one wife every day, why would he love Rohini more? Well, it turns out to be, after my research, I figured out it's got to do with lunar occultation. A lunar occultation is when, from our perspective, the moon appears to go in front of a star from our perspective. For example, in 2006, this is a simulated image of the moon going in front of Kritika Nakshatra, and we see that over here. So it turns out that if this line that you see here, the circle, is the ecliptic on which the sun and the moon appear to traverse, all the nakshatras are distributed about this ecliptic. And it turns out that if a nakshatra is located more than 6 degrees from the ecliptic, the moon will never touch it, because the moon only goes from +5 degrees to -5 degrees approximately. So it'll never go to 6 degrees and beyond. So the nakshatra is more than 6 degrees, moon's not going to touch that particular nakshatra. If the nakshatra is located between 4 to 6 degrees, it will experience a 4-year set of occultations. And that's what happens to Rohini. Rohini is at 5 degrees from the ecliptic. So it experiences a set occultations. If it is less than 4 degrees, then it experiences 2 sets of occultations separated by a certain period of time. It repeats all over after 19 years. So this is the so-called maintenance cycle, for example. And I counted between 2014 to 2018, the last 4-year period that we have, Rohini was occulted 50 times. And the previous occultation of cycle of Kritika was only around 25 times. Our ancients had observed that. They had observed repeated 19-year cycles. They observed that, hey, the moon seems to like Rohini more than the other nakshatras. And they encoded that wisdom into a brilliant romantic story of how Chandra loves Rohini more than the others. So if we have this key to unlock that metaphor, suddenly it becomes clear. If we did not know this metaphor, then we say, some ridiculous mythology. So that's what happens over here. So this is a simulated picture again, Rohini occulted by the moon in 2016, April 10th. It starts at 5:15 p.m. and the occultation ends by 6:30 p.m. Central. And you can see this coming out over here. So that is our first story. I'd like to go on to a second story, which is the story of Dhruva. Dhruva is a child star who rules the sky. So we all know the story of Dhruva. It's a story that could be contemporary with our times too. Now, Dhruva's father, the king, he had 2 wives. So Surachi was a favored younger wife, and Suniti was Dhruva's mother. And you can see where this is going. Pretty unhappy story over here. Poor Dhruva, he had an unhappy childhood because his father favored his stepbrother and ignored him. And one day when he went and sat in his father's lap, his stepmother came harshly and said, "You have no place on your father's lap, so get out of there." And that disturbed him tremendously. And Suniti tried to console her distraught son, with a message of karma. We are experiencing our karma and so on. But 5-year-old Dhruva said, "I need to go to Vishnu and ask him what exactly is going on over here." So he leaves home, and in his wanderings, he meets the revered Saptarishi, and the Saptarishi teach him how to meditate on Vishnu and do tapasya, and Dhruva starts that one. And eventually, after a long period of meditation on Vishnu, Vishnu appears before Dhruva, and he asks, "Okay, Dhruva, here I am. What do you want?" And by that time, Dhruva is in a state of bliss. He no longer wants the things he had wanted earlier because he's now enlightened. He doesn't want that. He had earlier wanted to know what is his place in the universe. So Vishnu says, all right, he makes him into a motionless star in the sky. And it's a small star. Mind you, Dhruva is not a very big star. He makes him a motionless star and says that all the other stars will go around you, Dhruva. In addition to that, even the Saptarishis will also go around you. So it turns out that this is the North Star. Its position in the sky is an indicator of the latitude in which you live. And this is the position of the Saptarishi at different seasons, the winter, spring, summer, and fall. In a 24-hour period, the Saptarishi will go entirely around Dhruva, because that's our rotation, right? Earth rotates once in 24 hours. It'll appear that it is going in that particular fashion. Now, if you were to take your DSLR camera, your Nikon or your Canon or Sony or whichever camera you have, put it on a tripod, point it to the north after dark, and leave the shutter open for a few hours, and pretty soon you're going to see something like this. And this is called a star trail. And you see at the center here is the pole star, and around it in increasing circles, you see the stars are going in larger and larger circles. So this represents the rotation of the Earth, if you will, and it shows you what star trails look like. So with that background, I can now introduce a night sky to you. So this is the Pune skies, which is simulated. Today is August 28th, and I believe this is at 10:50 at night today, if you were to take a look. This green line over here is the horizon, and this is the day sky over here and the night sky over here. These circles that you see over here, these are projections of Earth's latitudes and longitudes on the sky. So they become celestial coordinates when they go on the sky. And our ancient Indians knew all of these because it was they who designed many of these things, trying to see the position of various stars. And at the center over here, you see Dhruva. This is Dhruva. This circle that you see, I'm going to call attention to this. There's something called the precession circle, and I'll talk about it presently. And this particular star is Abhijit Vega. It's interesting to keep an eye on this because pretty soon we'll see Abhijit will be in a different position later. And every day, if you wanted to know what the nakshatra of the day is, it depends on when the moon appears over the eastern horizon, whether there's a full moon or the new moon, when it appears over the eastern horizon, what section of sky was it in? So in today's night sky, it appears to be between Bharani and Kritika. So I would imagine that around 10:50, it is perhaps already Kritika. I wouldn't bet on it. I don't have the Panchanga in front of me, but it's Kritika Nakshatra because tonight it's going to be in this particular Nakshatra. The moon will fall back every day. So the apparent rotation appear to go like this. And what else do I want to point out? These names that you see here, some of them are the Rashis, and some of these things are the Nakshatras itself. For example, you have Dhanista over here, and you have got Revathi over here, and so on. So these are the various stars. So this pole star is the 90-degree point. From 90, if you count, this is 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. 0 is a celestial equator. On Earth, it is equator. And the sky becomes celestial equator. On the day of the equinox, the sun would be exactly on the celestial equator. Then it goes north till it reaches 23.3 degrees. That is the summer solstice. Then it goes south till it reaches minus 23.3 degrees by crossing the equator, and that becomes the winter solstice. So these are the cardinal positions of astronomy, which our ancients were intimately familiar with. They knew all of these things. And guess what? They encoded these into stories. And I'd like to take that to the story of Bhasmasura. Everybody knows about the story, right? And how ancients measured the passage of time. So the story goes that Vrika, the Ashura, he got a boon from Rudra. And what was that boon he wanted? He wanted a boon that if he places his hand on somebody's head, that person should die. Now, Rudra, against his better judgment, he says, all right, I'll give you that boon. So he grants him that boon. Now, the minute this Ashura gets that boon, he starts chasing Rudra. Because he wants to place his hand on Rudra's head to see if Rudra would die. So he starts chasing Rudra. And so that's what the story says. And Rudra starts running away from him. And in doing so, eventually a divine maiden comes along. And she is a beautiful woman. And this Ashura looks at her and is enamored. And he wants this maiden to marry him. And she says, I can't marry you. You're an uncouth Asura. I can't do that. And he says, no. I know all the fine arts and I can sing, dance, and all those things. And she says, all right, can you dance like me? And so she goes through some dance steps and Ashura follows. In the process of dancing, she places her hand on her own head. Ashura forgets about this boon and touches his own head and he falls dead. It turns out that he dies on Uttarayana. So what is this Uttarayana? This concept is known from Vedic times. It's mentioned in several texts, Surya Siddhanta, Bhagavad Gita, and so on. Uttarayana refers to the 6-month northward course of the sun. Remember when I said that the sun comes to the 23.3 degrees point, the summer solstice, the days are getting longer and longer. Then it goes through Dakshinayana, a 6-month southern course where the nights are longer and longer till it goes to minus 23.3 degrees. It turns out that Vrika is it's a nocturnal animal. It's a hunter, hunts at night and sleeps during the day. Rudra is a stand-in for the sun, Agni, sun, and so on. So Rika chasing Rudra means the nights are getting longer and longer. It's a night of the wolf. The nights are getting longer and the sun is running away, literally. And on the day of Uttarayana, the wolf dies. Symbolically, it means the sun is now going to return. It becomes longer and longer. So our ancients built in this story to remember the phenomenon of Uttarayana and Dakshinayana. That is what this particular story represents. So with this, we know that ancient Indians devised these stories. In a sense, the earliest stories were to measure the passage of time. So Urmiji, what we have done is we have seen how ancient Indians use the skies as celestial clocks to measure the passage of time. I've shown you the Nakshatra Rasi model, Uttarayana, Dakshinayana, and the solar year, synodic and sidereal months. So Urmiji, I hope that addresses your question. What were some of the stories that the ancients talked about?
Yes, sir, that was absolutely mesmerizing. This brings me, one has heard that we can use the Indian astronomy to date events that have held in the past. Could you give us some how it is done as to how one can calculate those days?
Yes, excellent question. How did ancient Indians, rather, when they made some astronomical observations, today we can go and say this measurement was made in a certain period of time. How on earth are we doing these things? That's a very relevant question. Are we just pulling these out of a hat, or what is going on? Well, it is something called archaeoastronomy. Now, archaeologists go to the field and they dig up some artifact, and they use carbon dating, and they use all kinds of calibration means to figure out the date. Archaeoastronomers, on the other hand, they go through the texts to look at instances where there are astronomical measurements and try to use mathematics and astronomical knowledge to try and understand when, why might such a measurement have been made. So the question is, how do we use Indian astronomy to measure distant past events? We need to know that there are at least 5 degrees of motion of the Earth. We are familiar with rotation once in 24 hours about this axis. Remember, we talked about Dhruva. So this axis of rotation is pointing to Dhruva. 24 hours, we go through the spin over here. We also talked about Uttarayana, Dakshinayana, equinoxes, solstices. So this is the solar year. It takes 365.24 days. Now, we have also known that there are 3 more cycles. This is a famous Milankovitch cycle, the Serbian scientist who he did not discover these things. He only linked these things to the ice ages and such things on Earth. So this particular eccentricity motion is where the orbit of the Earth around the sun goes from elliptical to circular, and this takes about 100,000 years. We also have a tilt cycle, which happens in 41,000 years, where currently we are at 23.5 degrees approximately. It goes all the way till this point to this point in about 41,000 years. The third is very important for us, precision, because this is what is going to help us to understand the ancient events. Precision is a phenomenon which takes about 26,000 years, and it is where the axis of rotation of the Earth has a wobble in it. It goes through this circle that you see that takes 26,000 years to complete. It is like a spinning top. If you take a top and you tie a string and do that, the top spins very, very fast. And as it is spinning fast, you can imagine there's a wobble, the wobble to the top. And the Earth is doing that. The fast spin is 24 hours, and the slow spin wobble is 26,000 years. So using this wobble, we will be able to estimate some of the incidents in Indian astronomy, because a wobble will determine those celestial points that we talked about, where a certain nakshatra is at a solstice point or a equinox point. That will change with time. That changes because of this precision. So we have a very precise astronomical celestial calendar out there to within 26,000 years, we can date some of these things. So if somebody says Rama was born in Chaitra Masa, so this means, like I said earlier, the full moon is in the Chitra Nakshatra, 180 degrees away is the Ashwini Nakshatra, and we know 2 data points jump out at us. Now, if somebody says Varsha Ritu, which is rainy season, began in the Ashada Masa, it means that the full moon was in Ashada Nakshatra and the sun was 180 degrees away in Punarvashi Nakshatra. So much is good, we know that. But today we know in India, the rainy season happens when the sun is in the Mriga Nakshatra. Now, this sun has also got a nakshatra like the moon. So in this case, it is in Ashada, but today the sun is in the Mriga Nakshatra. So there is a 2 nakshatra difference, Surya Nakshatra difference. And this difference has happened because of precision, like I said, the precision phenomena. So you can divide 26,000 by 27, you get approximately 960 years per nakshatra. That is a precision rate. So approximately 2,000 years ago, the statement was true. It turns out to be from Kalidasa's famous work, Meghaduta, in this time period. So just by seeing Varsharitu began in Ashada Masa, we'd be able to date when that work was written, because if that phenomena was true in that time period, it is no longer true because of precision. And this reference is from Dr. P.V. Varta. And we can use this phenomena to also date the Dhruva story. Now, for example, the Dhruva story we just heard, not only does Vishnu make young Dhruva into a star in the sky, he also says, your mother, Suniti, will also be a star close to you. Well, it turns out that in the present times, Polaris is our pole star. It does not have a companion. There's no companion nearby. So this story of Dhruva could not have been written in recent times. Even if we go back to 1000 BCE, there was no pole star. This here is a precession cycle that I've shown over here, that there wouldn't have been a pole star anywhere. Even 1000 years ago, Polaris would have been 5 to 7 degrees from the pole. So we know nowhere near this time period the story could have happened. However, in 3000 BCE, Thuban is this entity you see over here. This is Thuban in our times. Thuban would have been the pole star. And what do you know? It does have a companion close by. And this is Suniti. So Dhruva and Suniti being here tells us that when the story was composed, that story writer has seen that there is a pole star Dhruva and a companion nearby, and we can go back and say this story would have been made in 3000 BCE. So this is an instance of how we can use dating. So Urmiji, that is how we use precession of equinox. Because the phenomenon of 26,000 years, we can use that rather precisely and say when some stories and dates of events can be estimated just by using this phenomenon. I hope that addresses your question.
Absolutely. Mesmerizing stories, one after the other. These stories are full of anecdotes, some of them. How old are some of the astronomical anecdotes, these stories?
That is amazing. Yes, that leads us to our dating of these events itself. So that's a question people often ask. Now that we know how to measure these things, how old is Indian astronomy? What are some of the old events that can be dated? Now there are a whole lot of things that can be dated, and there is an issue of interpretation and many other things. There are people saying amazingly ancient dates of some of these things. I have only curated a few of these events so that we can get a feel for some of these. First of all, the book Vedanga Jyotisha. Vedanga Jyotisha is associated with the Rig Veda as well as the Yajur Veda. There are two additions to that, if you will. And in Vedanga Jyotisha, we are seeing an instance that refers to the winter solstice happening at the Dhanista Nakshatra. Many people try to date this. People like Colebrook, who was a Britisher, people like Tilak, people like Dikshit. Many people tried to estimate it. I think Dikshit, who was from Pune, he was one of the earliest persons, 1880, 1885 or so, who estimated correctly that this is referring to the winter solstice at Dhanista Nakshatra. And what does that mean? If this is a celestial equator, sun is at minus 23.3 degrees. So if this is 0 degrees, you can count over here that sun is at minus 10, minus 20, minus 23.5 degrees. Sun is at the winter solstice point, and the longitude is Dhanista. So when the sun is at the Dhanista Nakshatra, because of precision, we can crank back in time, observe that there's no pole star. In 1440 BCE, there's no pole star. In our time, we had Dhruva, but there isn't a pole star here. So I have simulated this in the planetarium software and going back to minus 1440 and shown that at the equinox point, the winter solstice point, Dhanista Nakshatra, that is what Vedanga Jyotisha refers to. So we know that this book was written in 1440 BCE and contains a lot of practical astronomy. It talks about how to compute Tithi, how to estimate the nakshatras and other such things. Very, very amazing. Now, if we think that this is ancient, wait till you hear this one. This is by Rishi Yajnavalkya. Yajnavalkya wrote the work called Satapatha Brahmana. In India, we have a curious phenomena. Although we have so many ancient rishis, brilliant people who wrote brilliant works, we don't learn about a single one of them. Our mind is conditioned to think these are all mythical figures. Somehow by magic, their books exist, but these are all mythical figures. This is how our education system fills our mind with deracinated trash, if you will. However, Rishi Yajnavalkya, he wrote Satapatha Brahmana. Satapatha Brahmana is a manual for the Vedic practitioner on how to do some of the Vedic rituals. In doing so, he tells a practitioner how to face the east direction. Many of us will scoff at that and say, what on earth? Wherever the sun appears, that is the east direction. Well, it turns out that between Uttarayana and Dakshinayana, you have the sun going from minus 23.5 to plus 23.5. So where is east? Is it here, and here? Well, on the day of the equinox, the sun is pointing to the true east direction. That is our notion of east. So Yajnavalkya is telling the practitioner, you can, Kritika does not move from the eastern quarter, from the eastern skies. So you can light your fire under Kritika. That is what he says. And again, several people try to decode this. And finally, we understand today that it is referring to the heliacal rising of Kritika. The heliacal rising means this is the horizon, the ground line again. And the Vedic practitioner wakes up early in the morning before dawn, has his ritual bath, comes out, the skies are still dark, and sees where is Kritika, and he sees Kritika, a small kite-like nakshatra, if you will. And having known that, half an hour later, the sun will appear over the eastern horizon, wash out Kritika, but you have two dots, you have two lines, 2 points, if you will, from Kritika to the sun. You know, this is a straight line, and you put your yajna over here, and you start your yajna over here. This is what you would do. So in other words, this was a way in which one could find the east direction. Again, simulated this in the planetarium software. This date comes out to staggering 2982 BCE is when the Kritika Nakshatra was precisely on the celestial equator, plus and minus about 200 years. This phenomena would have been true. So this is around this time frame when Yajnavalkya would have lived and written the Satapatha Brahmana. Well, there's an ancient epoch that is encoded in our tables. Puranas are talking about something called Kali Yuga. Aryabhatta, Surya Siddhanta refer to this epoch. Pulisa Siddhanta, Brahmagupta, even Al-Biruni is referring to this epoch. In the temple epigraphy in Aihole, it's constructed, it says constructed 3,735 years after the Bharata War. Lee Gentle, he was a French astronomer who came to Pondicherry, and he's obtained astronomical tables from the Brahmins at that time, and he published this as tables of Trivalor. He couldn't understand these tables. He sent it off to his buddy in Italy called Cassini. So Cassini was a mathematician astronomer. He studied these tables extensively, and he declared that it's referring to an epoch on the midnight of February 17th, 3102 BCE. Later, Britishers, Playfair, Bentley, Colebrook, Burgess, they also studied this phenomena, Surya Siddhanta, and said that it refers to the same position over here. It turns out to be a rare clustering of planets, a conjunction, if you will, of planets, sun and moon in the Revathi Nakshatra. And this marker has been known from that time till the present time. Even today, a traditional Hindu, when he tells his prayers, he marks time from the start of Kali Yuga. He goes back to this time and says so much of time has elapsed till the present day. And he tells his prayers with respect to that. So this is the amount of civilizational memory that we have of this particular epoch. And I've simulated this also in the planetarium software. So this turns out to be the Revathi Nakshatra is over here. We have Sun, Surya, Chandra, the Moon, Guru, Jupiter, Shukran, Venus over here, Mangala, which is Mars, Buddhan, Mercury, Shani, which is Saturn, slightly away, but still clustered more or less over here in the Revathi Nakshatra. So this clustering has been remembered for a pretty long time in our civilization, if you will. And this comes to a staggering date of 3102 BCE. Now we have a story of Aditi. Aditi, along with her co-sister Aditi, they married the Rishi Kashyapa, and they gave rise to the 12 Adityas, 11 Rudras, 8 Vasus, collectively called the Devas and the Daityas, and the Uttarayana in Bhagavad Gita says is the path of the Devas, and Dakshinayana is the path of the Daityas. Now, there are a couple of works called Taittiriya Samhita and Aitreya Brahmana. This is speaking of Aditi, and she is the presiding deity of the Punarvashu Nakshatra. And all sacrifices begin and end with her. In other words, it refers to a vernal equinox position of Punarvashu. And to see that, we can go to a translation of Aitreya Brahmana by Martin Hogg. And in this, we see the sacrifice, the mystical sacrificial personage went away from the gods. What does this mean? It means that because of the precession phenomena, the calendars were not right. Whatever they expected, Nakshatra should be in a certain place, that was no longer in its place because there's an enormous passage of time by the time you come to Aditi. So the sacrifice went away from the gods. The gods were consequently unable to perform any further ceremony. They did not know the time. They did not know the date. They did not know where it had gone to. They said to Aditi, let us know the sacrifice through thee. Aditi said, let it be so, but I will choose a boon from you. They said, choose. And she chose this boon. All sacrifices shall commence with me and end with me. So this is a remembrance that the calendar was reset at the time of Aditi to account for the precision phenomena, the fact that the skies weren't keeping time the way ancients had thought. So by the time of Aditi's story, there was already a need to reset this calendar. And what is this referring to as far as archaeoastronomy is concerned? Well, it turns out to be a staggering 6000 BCE. So this Aditi and Diti, like I said, these are the stars. This is Diti and this is Aditi. And this is the Punarvashu Nakshatra they're associated with. And the phenomena, earliest Indians refer to the new year, always starting with vernal equinox. Vernal equinox is the start of the new year. So Aditi is saying all the sacrifices begin and end with me is a colloquial way of saying that this is where the new year is going to start. It will end at this point also. So that is Punarvashu Nakshatra over here. So two people had decoded this. One is Balagangadhar Tilak, one of the great sons of Maharashtra, as well as Abhyankar, another great son of Maharashtra in recent times. They had decoded this and they said that this refers to the vernal equinox at Punarvashu Nakshatra. Again, I've cranked this back in the planetarium software to verify this, and we see that indeed around 6000 BCE in this time frame, month and day, you can see that the sun was at this equinox. Equinox is when the sun is on the celestial equator. It's on the celestial equator over here, and it refers to this phenomena. Surya Siddhanta. This is the Burgess translation in English, and it is referring to a conjunction of all the planets in Aries. Aries is a Mesha Rashi, if you will, and it is referring to this particular great conjunction of all of these things. And this is not decoded often, but if you take a look at it, the planets over here are clustered in the Mesha Rashi. I've shown an exploded view over here, and you can see all of these clustered over here. And this can be dated precisely to 6779 BCE, February 22nd. So whoever noted this particular point, the Surya Siddhanta, is referring to a phenomena that turns out to be this ancient, if you were to crank it back in the astronomical calendar. Then let me talk also the story of Surya, Sanjana, Chaya, and Ashwinis. All of us know the story, right? We have heard about this right from our childhoods. So many references to this, the Rig Veda, Markandeya Purana, Matsya, Vishnu Purana, all of these are talking, and Ashwinis appear in many verses in the Rig Veda, many hymns specifically devoted to them. So it says that Sanjana marries Surya and they gives birth to Ashwini Kumaras, and she could not bear the heat of the sun. Sun was too hot for her. So she abandons her husband and she flees off to the cooler regions and leaves a shadow in her place, Chaya. And pretty soon the sun finds out the deception, asks Chaya, where exactly Sanjana? And she reveals that she's gone off to the cooler region. And the sun follows her. And he finds out that she's taken the form of a mare, and he also takes the form of a mare. Surya follows over there as a mare, and he goes to the cooler region. So remember, when it is cooler over here, the winter, it is summer in the southern places, so hemisphere. This is again decoded by Abhyankar and Balagangadhar Tilak, who are referring to several verses in the Rig Veda where it says the Ashwinis appear at dawn for their share of the sacrifice, implying a heliacal rising of Ashwini, the winter solstice, because it is cooler in the northern hemisphere, the cooler regions, if you will. So this particular heliacal rising of Ashwini, we can date because of precision. It only happened in this time frame, 7200 BCE. This is what the Rig Vedic verses of Ashwini are referring to. This is the epoch of Ashwini, if you will. Now, there's also a story of Agastya. Agastya is the author of several verses in the Rig Veda, and he's one of the Sapta Rishis, appears in Ramayana, Mahabharata, many Puranas, Tamil Sangam literature. He appears over there also. And there is now there's a star called Canopus in the southern hemisphere that is associated with Agastya. And the question comes, why is Agastya even associated with Canopus, this particular star? Normally, we can't see canopus because of the southern hemisphere. India is to the north of the equator. We are in the northern hemisphere. You can't go to Kanyakumari, go on tippy toes and hope to see canopus. That's not going to happen. Curvature of the earth is too much. You can't do that. However, because of precision, the earth has dipped in a certain way, like you're on a ride at Disneyland or elsewhere. The ride has dipped in a certain way where we can now see the southern skies. That is the implication over here. So it turns out that if we plot, this is a plot from Abhyankar, he says this star Canopus was visible in Kanyakumari around 10,000 years ago, Madras in this time frame, Hyderabad 7,200 BCE, Vindhyas 5,200 BC by time comes to Delhi in 3,000 and odd. And here we are approximately 2,000 current era, and it's visible all over India, maximum visibility. It also will go through a disappearance cycle, and 10,000 years from now, we again, because the precision have gone upwards, if you will. So again, our view will be up and we can't see the southern stars. So we can't see canopus anymore. So he interpreted this saying, now Agastya's story says he crossed the Vindhyas, told it, don't grow till I come back. If that phenomena, if we peg it to that phenomena, it's 5,200 BC. However, I caution that there is additional stories of Agastya. One of the stories says that the gods came to Agastya and asked him to drink up the ocean water because there were some demons living under the ocean causing great havoc, and they wanted to finish them off. And so Agastya complies and he drinks up the ocean water, and the devas go and kill this demon over there. And the gods say, all right, Agastya, give up the waters. We need waters. So he finally gives up the water. Oceans are refilled. Now, this can be a civilizational memory of the late glacial maximum. The late glacial maximum started around 18,000 years ago and went through a maximum. And if we think that in Kanyakumari around 12,000 years ago, a new star was seen over the southern hemisphere. It's not in Kanyakumari because the sea coast would have been around 100 kilometers or so outside over there. So even if you go to Jaffna or to the far side of Sri Lanka, you'd still be able to see a new star that has just come up on the horizon. That would be Canopus around 12,000 years ago. That'll also be a time when the shorelines were much further out than what it is today. And eventually, as the ice melted and the sea levels went up, the oceans were refilled around 7,000 years ago. So this is a remembrance, if you will, generation by generation, that the Earth did go through a late glacial maximum, and that is encoded along with this new star that people are able to see as Agastya, and that remains in our collective memories, if you will. So this is a story of Agastya. Again, amazing to think of all of these things. So what I've shown in this section is great antiquity in the ancient Indian works, Vedanga, Jyotisha, Satapatha, Brahmana, Kali Yuga, era of Aditi, and the conjunction of stars and the planets, if you will, and Surya Siddhanta, the era of Ashwinis, and finally the Agastya story. So Urmiji, I hope this gives you a very good idea of some of the datable events in Indian astronomy. There are many, many more, but I just curated these, if you will, to give an idea.
Correct, sir. Listening to you, a renewed respect for all our scholars dated back in history, who without precision equipments and modern equipments have been able to mark all these stories for us, as well as the sky decoded it for us. So cosmology speaks of the origin of the universe. Does our Indian text speak of anything like this? If you could share with us in brief.
Yes, indeed. So we do have several texts that talk about cosmology. These are the great questions of creation, existence, and universe. One must understand it's only in India where there's plentiful water, excellent climate throughout the year. There's no severe winter, there's no severe summer, and so on. A lot of rivers, a lot of food, plenty. One could have a full belly, sit at night, look at the stars and ask, who am I? And why am I here? And what is the goal of life? All these philosophical questions could come only with a full belly and a happy mind. Never with survival in mind, you couldn't ask these questions. So existence, universe, creation, we see a lot of it in our text, and the earliest ones, Rig Veda, we see several of the creation episodes over there. I just given the Nasadiya Sukta. We also have the Devi Suktam. We have several other suktas that talk about creation. But this is nice because it brings out the scientific way of thinking of our ancient rishis. They made a prediction and a correction. Initially, this is the Griffith translation. It says, there was nothing, not existence, no air, no heavens. What covered it? Where was it? Who's keeping? No cosmic waters and fathoms, depths unfathomed. There was neither death or immortality. There was no night, no day, but the one, Brahman. Breathe windlessly, self-sustaining. Then there was that one, and there was no other. So this is what the ancients saw the earliest creation period as. But then they went through a correction. They said, who knows? Who can say where it all came from, when creation happened? The Devas themselves are later after creation. So who knows whether it had its origin? The creator, whether he fashioned it, whether he knows, whether he serves in the highest heavens, whether he or she may also not know it. So we are seeing over here a very logical, rational way of thinking by our ancient rishis, who were not dogmatic in their approach towards understanding things, but kept lines of inquiry open as they investigated the cosmos. And we are seeing that repeatedly. For example, in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we are seeing a famous dialogue between the Rishi Yajnavalkya and the Rishini Gargi. Now, we are told in contemporary India that women were not accorded equal rights in ancient India, but the evidence points otherwise. Here we have Gargi, who's challenging Yajnavalkya in the court to understand, to question and to see if he knows science really. So she is posing a series of questions. For example, she says, Yajnavalkya, if all this is pervaded by what is water pervaded? So he's replying, by air, O Gargi, and so on. So the questions are, he calls out a cosmology in response to the questions by Gargi. Everything on earth is wrapped in water, water is wrapped in air is wrapped in sky by the word of Gandharvas, which we imply as planets, Gandharvas in Aditya, which he implies as sun. Then he got this red one wrong. He says, the world of sun is wrapped in the world of Chandra, the moon. This should actually be interchanged over here. The world of moon is wrapped in the world of Nakshatras, which is the stars. The world of Nakshatras is wrapped in the world of Devas by Indra. Indra is wrapped in the world of Prajapati, which is the galactic center. And Prajapati itself is wrapped in Brahmana. So we are seeing that there is no separation between the creator and the creation in Indian philosophies. And we're seeing that encoded in the understanding the cosmos and the science over here, saying that everything is Brahman. That is the ultimate that you can think about. And Gargi wants to know even beyond that. She asks, okay, by what is beyond that world of Hiranyagarbha? And he says, do not, O Gargi, push your inquiry too far. This is said in jest. It is not a metaphor for anything else, lest your head should fall off. You're questioning about a deity that should not be questioned. So here we are seeing interaction between Gargi and Yajnavalkya in a king's court that a lot of scholars gathered over there, and questioning on cosmology. And we are seeing in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other places a description of Brahma and the Hindu cyclical universe. It's amazing, if you ask me. It's talking about the cyclical universe in response to our Big Bang universe, if you will. So it's talking about the life cycle of Brahma, where it is talking from the point of view of the Chatur Yuga, starting with the Chatur Yuga, Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali Yuga. This is in the ratio of 4:3:2:1, which is equivalent to all these years over here, amounting to 4.32 million years, if you will. And 1,000 of these Chatur Yugas give a Mahayuga, 71 of this gives a Manvantara, and 14 of that give a Kalpa, or a creation. We are coming to 4.32 billion years by the time we come here. And this is equal to 1 day of Brahma, just the daylight, if you will. And this is there in Srimad Bhagavatam, for example. And if you take 1 night of Brahma in addition, after which is a pralaya, which is a dissolution and everything starts all over again after a period of rest. And we are told that each Brahma lives for 100 such Brahma years, and we are currently in the 51st such current Brahma. So ancient Indians saw cyclical time in enormous time scales. which amazingly seems to correlate well with our present day understanding of cosmology. Today, we are talking about a huge inflation event, which we refer to as a Big Bang, and giving rise to our present 13.8 billion years worth a cosmic history, if you will, and here's where we are today, and so on. So, and we also understand that from Hawking's work, from other cosmologists' work, there are great questions today. Is the universe going to expand forever, or is it going to contract eventually back to a singularity? And there are people trying to address these questions. Some people say it'll forever go to an expansion, and it'll take trillions upon trillions of years. And once you start adding up Brahma's timeline, you see, yes, that is a very, very big timeline over there. And some say that no, there could be a contraction event eventually that could happen. And that is the big bounce model. The big bounce model says there's a pre-existing universe which eventually collapses into a singularity and gives rise to a new inflation incident, and that gives rise to a new universe. And this is also debated in cosmology today. And this seems to fit well with the Indian understanding of a cyclical recurrent creation and destruction cycles. And this professor is Roger Penrose, who's an astrophysicist, and he's done many works. In fact, he was given the Nobel Prize in 2020 for his work on black holes and so on. He says that there was an earlier universe prior to our universe, and amazingly, he says it can still be observed in the cosmic microwave background radiation. So he's detected about 37 anomalies, if you will, in today's cosmic microwave background, which he says were the remnants of the black holes of the previous universe. And that is what has given rise to this asymmetric universe that we see today. Because if inflation was uniform everywhere, we expect to see a symmetric universe everywhere, similar distribution of stars, galaxies, matter, but that is not the case. We see some places have got more, some places less, and the question comes, why this asymmetry in the inflation? And his explanation is that it is a remnant of the prior universe. If you will, there is Vasana. Vasana is a Vedic concept that says our Atman takes the behavioral patterns we have, form deep ruts on our Atman, and they influence our choices in our next birth. So that's a deeply Vedantic concept that we are driven to search. For example, if you see a super talented child, you ask, how on earth does this child get this talent? It's Vasana. Or if you have a calling towards a certain kind of thing, that's again Vasana of a prior lifetime. Similarly, he's bringing in this concept that the black holes left their imprints, and that is what caused some of these differences. Amazing work being proposed using Hawking points and so on. If that is not amazing enough, our cosmology also anticipates multiverses. They did not use this language, obviously, but they seem to have anticipated that. Bhagavad Purana, over here, it says there are innumerable universes beside this one. They're unlimitedly large. They move about like atoms in you. Use the Brahman over here. Therefore, you're called unlimited. Another verse, Bhagavad Purana, it says you're unlimited, the countless universes, each enveloped in its own shell, and so on. We also see multiverse in another Purana, Brahma Vaivarta Purana. There's an analogy of ants and Indra. Indra turns out to be a hugely conceited person over there who wants to build a magnificent palace, and every day he is pushing Vishwakarma, saying, do this, do that. Vishwakarma is thoroughly tired of Brahma's needling over here. So eventually Brahmana comes over there, a short person, he comes and Indra is interacting with him. And in doing so, the Brahmana humbles, and the story tells us he humbles Indra by pointing out that there were countless universes prior to you. Countless Indras have ruled prior to you. Then he points out some ants going on the floor in a line, and he says each of those ants were an Indra in a prior universe. So he's trying to humble this Indra by showing that yours is a limited lifetime, and there are so many of these things. So we're seeing multiverses coming again and again in different concepts. Another amazing instance of that of space-time, that too, of course, space-time is our modern understanding with Einstein and so on, but a story that is there seems to have encoded this phenomenon, if you will. And this is the story of Brahma's consort. There was a king called Kakudmi who had a beautiful daughter, Revathi. She was super accomplished. She was so good, so accomplished that Kakudmi tried to find a suitable match for her on Earth, traversed every corner of earth. He couldn't find a match good enough for his daughter. He said, let's go to the creator himself. Let's go to the creator and ask him, have you made a match for my daughter? So off he sets off to Brahma-Loka, he and his daughter, they go. And when they go there, they see the creator Brahma is enjoying a Gandharva concert. So they stand respectfully aside, waiting for the concert to be over. When the concert is over, Brahma motions them to come here. And they come, why have you come here? And Kakudmi says, there's a reason he's come. And Brahma starts laughing. He says, in the time you were waiting here for this concert to be over, 27 Chaturyugas are over on earth. Everybody you knew is dead and gone. The kingdoms are come and gone. Everything is over. And Kakudmi is very, very unhappy. But Brahma says, don't be unhappy. Go back. By the time you reach earth, it'll be time for Bhagavan Krishna to be, for his avatar to take place on earth. And his brother Balarama is a correct match for Revathi. So that is what the story tells us from Srimad Bhagavatam. And I try to place this in the context of today's space-time. Obviously, it doesn't talk about these things in that word. But here we are, the Milky Way galaxy. Our nearest neighbor is Andromeda, about 2 million light years away. And our local group of galaxies is within 8 million light years. Srimad Bhagavatam, if you take 27 Chaturyugas, assuming that Kakudmi traveled at nearly the speed of light, we can imagine that in 27 Chaturyugas, he'd have reached 116 million light years. That is much further than 8 million light years, our local group of galaxies. How far would it have been? If this is a local group of galaxies that we're talking about, and this is the visible universe over here, we are talking about 200 million light years over here, which is a Laniakea supercluster. So the ancient Indians' concept of time mapped to today's understandings would have been up to the Laniakea supercluster was Brahma-Loka, if you will. We can also estimate the time from this. If each minute of Brahma is 6 million Earth years, because Kakudmi spent 116 million Earth years listening to the concert, that means if you were to divide it by this figure, you get 19 minutes, 26 seconds in dilated time. That is how long Brahma's concert took. So there are many ways of cutting and slicing this data, but it is amazing to see space-time also. So, Urmiji, there are great discussions in our history that talk on the nature of the cosmos, the creation. This is just a very simple sampling of them. Rig Veda, Yajnavalkya, Gargi, Brahma's day and night, age of cosmos, Big Bounce model, multiverses, space-time. Yes, these amazing things are there. It's there in Srimad Bhagavatam. Just take a reading of it and we'll see all of these things.
So thank you so much, Dr. Vedam. And I wish we had a lot more time than this. So a question that we really don't want to miss is what we've been fed with in our history books, that we are Aryans, came from outside. We had another question on Greek, but we'll have to skip that. The members have a lot of questions. So could you just briefly tell us about what we've read in our history books, that Aryans came from mid-Europe into India? There's a lot of controversy with that.
Yes, thank you, Nalini. Apologies for this long questions over here. So there's a lot of commonality between the Greek traditions and the Indian traditions that I love to talk about, but there's no time for that. And the question comes really related to how on earth are the Greek traditions related to Indian traditions? And second question, I talked about timelines 3000 BC, 5000, 6000 BC. How was that possible? Because our textbooks are telling us that there's something called Aryan invasion theory, 1500 BCE, when these nomads from Central Asia brought about Sanskrit, caste system, and all of the Sanskrit only in 1500 BCE in the composed Rig Veda in India. How can you have astronomical concepts this early and so on, and all these dates? That is the question. And I've shown in some of these stories that we have a lot of links between Mediterranean world and else in a very, very ancient period of time. And one such example is this archaeological evidence that in the Minoan Palace. Minoa is in the island of Crete in Greece, where they uncovered this fresco, if you will, and it's showing the langur, the very, very familiar monkeys we see in India. And the question comes, how on earth is it there in 1600 BCE in Greece? And the understanding is the trade, culture, and intellectual exchange between them and us. And we also see in southern India, Jallikattu, we see Minoan culture, we see the same jumping over the bull kind of tradition. We see that in Hittite vases, we see in the Minoan Palace, we see the same kind of things. Very, very interesting. We see Labyrinth, Maze, and Hosur, Krishnagiri, 2,500 years. I don't believe these dates, by the way. We see concepts of these things just similar to Greek stories and so on. I have talked about this extensively in my talk, so I do refer you all to take a look at my 2 talks, Indian Civilization, Unlimited Story, Untold Story, and Revisiting Indian Civilization, The Untold Story. Both, if you Google for my name, you'll find these over there. I have shown that archaeology and paleontology, this is all evidence-based. Using the evidence, we can show great antiquity of human presence in India. I've analyzed the genetic evidence of ancient lineages in India spreading outwards in various time frames. We have shown today, I showed you some archaeoastronomy showing ancient artifacts. There is evidence of knowledge transfer from India to other old civilizations in various periods of time. And we also have evidence of migrations out of India following a 200-year monsoon failure in 2000 BCE. Our climate records show us this. Today in India, if monsoon fails for 1 year, we have a lot of problems in the rural areas. If the monsoon fails for 3 years in a row, we'll see farmer suicides, all kinds of problems are going to happen. We can imagine how much of chaos it would cause. Can you imagine 200 years of monsoon failure? Today, you have an artificial city like Bengaluru, where there's no river nearby. You can pump in water from Kaveri through electricity and so on. In ancient days, you had to situate next to a river. And the river runs dry, you're done for. Even if you build a magnificent Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and all these things, you leave your cities there and you go where water is. That is what you need to do. And we know there was a 200-year monsoon failure, 2000 BC. That is a smoking gun, and that led to outward migrations. And then also the drying up of Saraswati River in 1900 BCE that led to this. And these migrations I have shown in my talks with evidence how it led to spreading Indian knowledge in astronomy, mathematics, medicine to the outside world. I've shown evidence from ancient Greece, from the Mitannis, from the Hittites, Babylonians, Greece, China, and so on. What knowledge went where, how, who are the actors and transmission routes and so on. And all of my findings are contrary to our NCERT textbooks and the present day media narratives, which is postulating Aryan invasion or migration theories. I've shown how these theories are failed because they make use of the linguistic methods, which were motivated by 5 frameworks: the framework of the colonialists, the framework of the Eurocentric people, the framework of the missionaries, the framework of the Nehruvian socialists, and the framework of the Marxists. All these 5 frameworks have subverted our history to push their points of view. And this is what is happening. I've tried to take an evidence-based view of Indian history, and I've shown that the linguistic model isn't the right one to use over here. And based on several other findings, we find great antiquity in the Indian civilization, a continuity, cultural continuity of the civilization. We are seeing that. We are seeing a transmission of Indian knowledge systems out of India. We're seeing that also. So through all of those things, I'm calling it out and saying that what we are calling as Aryan invasion theory probably isn't the right theory, and there is a lot of evidence to the contrary. So over here, I put some of the notes, my email, my Twitter, Facebook, as well as the Ku app. Do search on YouTube for my name, Raj Vedam. You'll find several of my talks that deal with precisely this topic. And I hope that this will address many of your questions. Nalini ji.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is really good because so now we can breathe easy and say we are actually from this land from times immemorial, and we've not been imported from Europe. So we have many more questions. I think Swapna will just help us out with those.
Let me stop sharing my screen and okay.
Yeah, good evening, Dr. Vedam. It's been an amazing, I was trying to take notes and not knowing what to know and what not to know. It's been a brilliant evening.
Thank you.
I have a lot of questions, but I think we are short on time. I'm going to just pick up a few questions, which I've already noted down. There's a question from Gauri Deshpande who says, are there any parallel stories about the North Star in other civilizations, the Greek or the Roman?
So yes, there are other civilizations that talk about this observation of North Star, and famously the Aborigines of Australia, they have stories. I have to see whether they talk of the North Star in particular, but indeed, there are other cultures like the Aborigines of Australia. They have several stories. In North and South America, the natives over there have observed the skies, and obviously in China and India, we observe the skies. In Egypt, also ancient Egypt, observe the skies. We don't see much of a tradition in the West. So Greek stories are much later. We don't see much of astronomy over there, but some of the ancient cultures I talked about, yes, there are stories. Undoubtedly, they should be about the North Star too. I don't have it at my fingertips at this point.
Okay. Gauri, I hope that answers your question. So I have another question from Shama. She wants to know, did they also know did our ancients know various solar systems, galaxies, varying distances of the stars from the Earth, any other stories about the Milky Way?
Yes, there are. So we find in works, for example, Varahamihira's time, there is expressions of gravity, for example. There are understandings that the stars are distant. Yajnavalkya's cosmology, in talking to Gargi, that implies the ordering is right. What he's saying that there is water, then there is air, then there is the sky, then there is the planets, then there is sun, then the nakshatras. There's an understanding nakshatras are even beyond the stars, the sun and solar system. There's an understanding of these objects going all the way to the world of Gandharvas, to the world of Indra. We don't understand what those things are. So our ancients must have had an understanding of these objects. For example, today you can strain and try to look at Andromeda Galaxy. Andromeda Galaxy appears just near the Cassiopeia as a small cloud. It is like a dull gray cloud, if you will. If you go to a very dark sky, you can probably see it, but you would most often require a telescope to see it. Or you can see the Orion Nebula. Our ancients must have seen these things, and there must have been stories about that. In fact, the Britishers are recording that there were stories of Andromeda and there were stories of others in the ancient Indian works. For example, there is a claim that it was called Antarmata. Antarmata is one of the stories of Andromeda, a similar name with the Greek tradition and the Indian tradition. In the Greek tradition, it is a hero who's chained to a rock and rescued by a maiden and so on. In the Indian tradition, there is another story with it. If we had time to talk about the Greek stories and Indian stories. But to answer your question in particular, yes, there are stories that are relating to all of these things, including the Akasha Ganga, that is the Milky Way. That observed this, the Akasha Ganga, that referred to that. There are stories about that in addition. Yes.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Chanda Bhide. She wants to know, why is Uttarayana considered auspicious?
Why is Uttarayana considered auspicious? Okay, so let us consider what is going to happen. We are seeing as in the northern latitudes especially, as the days become shorter and shorter, the nights become longer and longer and cooler, perhaps even into winter times and so on, the crops don't grow yet. So you're seeing the growth of things reduce. As you go to more northern latitudes, this is more prevalent. And with Uttarayana, that is the time when the sun reverses and is coming north, and you're seeing that days are becoming longer and longer. Springtime, you're observing life is proliferant. Everywhere you go in India, you're seeing insects are coming, flowers are coming, all kinds of things are happening, bees and all those kind of things. You're seeing life is as if the whole of the earth is awakening. So it was seen as an auspicious time. In fact, Dakshinayana was seen as a part of the Pitrus. If you look at when we celebrate our particular Pitru day, when we observe that, it is after Dakshinayana has started. It is the first Amavasya. After that, we are on the path of the Pitrus. So there's an understanding clearly of the cycles of life and death, and understanding these in response to Uttarayana and Dakshinayana.
Oh, that's it's a simple explanation, but we never thought of it that way as to why it is considered auspicious.
Yes.
Okay, I have a lot of questions short on time. I'm going to skim through. I think, your storytelling has really got everybody going. I have Sharvari wanting to know, could you share a story about shooting stars?
Shooting stars. Yes, shooting stars, Dhumaketu. So they were referred to as the comets, and they were referred to as other things. Such stories are there. I'd like to tell you about very, very briefly a practice, if you will, which I've tried to decode it in various concepts, especially in Maharashtra. So there is a story that, is it on Ganesh Chaturthi? You're not supposed to see the moon. And if you did see the moon, in some places, maybe not all, they throw a stone at a neighbor's roof. I don't know if you've heard about this, but there is a story to that effect. And this, I've tried to track it back to the birth of the moon. In the Indian tradition, we are told that Atri and his wife Anusuya, they were the parents of the moon. Atri Gotra is related to several verses of Agni. Agni's verses in Rig Veda. His parampara is associated with that. Anusuya is also known with Sita, and she's like the earth, right? She's the one who seeds the rivers, the earth, and life, if you will. So symbolically, it is a symbolic union of fire and earth that has given rise to Chandra, the moon. And today's collision theory says that there was a planet-sized, Mars-sized object which collided with the Earth about 4.5 billion years ago. This is called Theia. The Greek name is Theia. That collision gave rise to a whole lot of debris, and that coalesced and formed the accretion model, and that formed the moon. That is the understanding. So it is literally fire and earth that caused the formation of Chandra. At that time, you could imagine heavy bombardment as material would fall back on the earth with stones and rocks and whatnot happening. And I suggested, how on earth did our rishis know these things? Well, we don't know the mysteries of the mind. If you go to tapasya and go into altered states of mind, you don't know how much of reality they could have seen. We have absolutely no idea, only speculation. So some of these stories look very amazing to us, but it's literally amazing to see how this could happen. What's the relation between Ganesha and Chandra again? Well, one of the stories says that when Ganesha had eaten so many sweets, his tummy was really big. He was walking at night, he tripped and fell, and Chandra saw that and he laughed at him. And Ganesha got so mad that he broke off his tusk. He became Ekadantaya. He broke off his tusk and threw it at the moon. How dare you laugh at me? And the moon got scarred. So that story is telling us how the moon got all those craters and scarring. It's referring to a collision with the tusk of Ganesha. And you see the stone throwing, everything. You can combine all these things, saying that here are a jumbled mass of stories that can evoke an understanding of, perhaps, of the collision model of creation of the moon.
Thank you so much. I have something to show you. I'm sure you will like seeing that. That's something which Sharvari has shared with us. It's a book, Sharvari. If you would unmute, you want to talk about it. There's a book called Romance of Astronomy. This is from her grandparents' library, written in
1873. 1873.
She's reading it now. So I
have this book with me. I've
see.
Inherited this book and I'm reading it. It's not half as exciting as what you have shared with us today.
Okay.
But I just thought, it's a treasure to have a book in print in 1873, and that, she has it in reading.
Wonderful. Okay. Very nice to see that.
Yeah. One last question, because we are really running out of time. What role did astronomy play in the construction of our temples? We all know about the Konark temple and the sun, but anything else besides that where astronomy had a role to play?
Absolutely. Very deep role. Very, very deep role, if you will. There was a deep understanding. Everything on Earth, everything as in the cosmos, so in the microcosm. Every aspect of our understanding of cosmology, cosmogony, and everything is a reflection as in the macrocosm, so in the microcosm. Such a mapping you find again and again, an affirmation of how we belong to the universe. It's an affirmation that we are not distinct from the universe. It's an affirmation that everything in the cosmos is connected. That was how our ancestors saw all of life, whether it's medicine, arts, Vastu Shastra, or everything else, they saw this. And we are seeing that in temple construction. All of you are familiar that if you go to temples, you have the Navagrahas, and you see the Navagrahas, you go to Pradakshina around the Navagrahas, and so on. We are also seeing that there are temples where the pillars are constructed in accordance with the understandings of the solstice and equinox positions, that a certain set of pillars would be exposed to the southern side, northern side, eastern side, and so on. So yes, there is a deep understanding of the cardinal points of astronomy, as well as constructing the pillars, the positioning, the where it faces, and everything in Vastu Shastra was in accordance with our understanding of the heavenly bodies. Yes, that's very much there. And again, the fundamental principle, as in the cosmos, so in the microcosm also.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vedam. I have a few more questions. If you're okay, we'll mail them to you. And if you could respond to us, we could share it with our members.
Sure.
Is that a possibility?
Sure, why not? Definitely.
That will be great, because I think we couldn't ask you all the questions. I have another dozen of them at least. So I think we've come to an end of a wonderful evening. What do I say? Wow is all which really comes to me right now. What an evening this has been. At the cost of sounding really melodramatic, I would like to say that you've really taken us to the stars and back, Dr. Vedam. Really, thank you so much for that. The stories took a new meaning, and there was a lot of information which was also disseminated at the same time. Your Aryan invasion theory has really left all of us thinking. That's like food for thought, because it was such a given. You read about it all the time. So it was a new take, and I'm sure all of us interested in this field would really look into it and start. We might ask you some questions, maybe call you again to talk about this if time permits us in the future. I would really like to take this opportunity to thank you, Dr. Vedam, for addressing us and taking time off from your weekend. A special heartfelt gratitude for being so considerate and accommodating as far as time is concerned. I know we kind of had to really push a little here and there for us and for you. Dear members, hope you enjoyed this evening. A big thank you for all of you too for sharing your weekend with us. I would like to thank our advisory board member, Dr. Arnavaz Damania, who's also with us. I don't think I can see her on my screen, but she's with us.
I think she's just left, and I think Ms. Firodia is also there. So we are very happy to have them with us.
Yeah. And like always, on behalf of the team, I would like to thank Aniket for being the rock, who is our pillar for all our virtual events. And once again, members, thank you so much. All of you have a great evening, and you have a great day ahead of you, Dr. Vedam. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
We'll
My
just
pleasure to be
do a
here.
couple of group pictures.